bans create shadow use, why Baden-Württemberg is building its own trail problem. Baden-Württemberg doesn't have a mountain bike problem, it has a system failure, and it shows up in the forest as something policymakers rarely name out loud: shadow use. Published by the Radical Life Studios and the MTB report. Shadow use is what happens when the real world demands a coherent, understandable network, but the official framework offers a patchwork of exceptions, gray zones, and technically not allowed. People don't stop going outside, they simply stop interacting with the system. And Baden-Württemberg's most famous example is right there in the law. Cycling in the forest is not permitted on paths under 2 meters wide, with exceptions possible, but still framed as exceptions. That legal architecture sends a clear cultural message. The kind of narrow natural connectors that make a trail network work are treated as a problem, unless someone has gone through the paperwork to carve out a special case. Here's the ugly part. Confusing systems don't produce compliance, they produce workaround culture. If you want people to behave well in shared natural spaces, you need 2 things. Clear rules people can actually understand, and a practical alternative that makes good behavior easy. A framework that forces beginners to guess what's allowed, doesn't educate anyone. It trains people to improvise. And improvisation in the woods doesn't create better conservation outcomes. It creates unmanaged use. This isn't theory. In Baden-Württemberg, the Forest Research Institute's study Walderholung, Mit und ohne Bike 2, shows the 2-meter rule is among the best-known rules associated with cycling. In the forest, it lives in people's heads, and yet the conflict topic doesn't disappear, because knowing a rule isn't the same as having a system that works. Shadow use is predictable human behavior, especially when rules feel detached from reality. Psychology has a word for that initial nope reaction when people perceive a top-down restriction as a loss of freedom. Reactance. Research shows this resistance tends to spike before rules take effect and often fades later, but the key point for forests is this: without a credible, usable alternative, restrictions don't guide behavior, they redirect it. And that's exactly why ban-first strategies backfire in outdoor recreation. They don't eliminate demand, they push it off the map. The real damage isn't people being in the forest, like the damage is unmanaged, like uncommunicated use. Shadow use has 3 characteristics that are terrible for both conservation and safety. It's not communicated, no clear do's and don'ts, no seasonal guidance, no etiquette, baseline. It's not maintained. Erosion hotspots remain hotspots, braking zones get worse, risky features appear without oversight. It's not steerable. Sensitive areas don't get protected through design. They get discovered the hard way. So when officials say illegal trails are the problem, they're often describing symptoms, not causes. The irony, even the state's own forestry actors already know the solution. Forced BW has publicly framed the approach in a way that actually fits reality. Create attractive, controlled trails to steer recreation, concentrate use, and protect sensitive areas through meaningful management instead of moral panic. That's how modern conservation is supposed to work in lived landscapes. Zoning, design, education, and clarity, not permanent gray zones. And internationally, you can see the same pragmatic line. Forestry England calls unauthorized trail building illegal and risky, but then explicitly urges builders to stop and contact them confidentially to explore working together. That's not weakness, that's realism. My hard demand. A connected, statewide shared trail system, not club islands. Baden-Württemberg does not need a few legalized trail islands run by clubs that start somewhere and end nowhere, while everything in between stays politically untouchable. That's not steering, that's outsourcing. What the state needs is a connected trail network that makes sense as a system. Natural connectors where appropriate, clearly marked sensitive zones and seasonal quiet periods where necessary, consistent signage and communication, and shared trails as the default, built on a culture of respect, not a culture of suspicion. If you don't build a system, you get shadow use. If you get shadow use, you lose steering. And if you lose steering, you don't get more conservation. You get less. That isn't a mountain bike story. It's a management story.